Ready? Okay, continue in סימן Shin Samach Gimel. We'll go through a few more dinim connected to Mavoi, and then we'll focus more on Tzeres HaPesach, which is more Negei L'Maisa. So Sif Lamed defines what a Mavoi is, because by a Mavoi we were more Mekel. The halachas of a Mavoi, the Alter Rebbe says, the difference between a Mavoi and a Chatzer. A Mavoi is less of a public, is more public and less private, and therefore the Tashmishi of Tzina are less over there. Therefore, we're more Mekel. Mashenkin by a Chatzer, we're more Machmer. By a Mavoi, we're Mekel. By a Lechi and a Kaira. By a Chatzer, we're not. Sif Lamed defined what a Mavoi is. A Mavoi, like we said, the typical definition of a Mavoi is a street, not really a street, but it's a access from where people could access from the streets, from the Rishus Harabim or the Carmelists, whatever it is, to go to their residences. They go into a Mavoi. The Mavoi could have different shapes. The Mavoi we're talking about over here, is a Mavoi that's closed from three sides. A dead end street. A Mavoi which looks like an L, or if it's open from both sides, that's already a different dinner which we're going to get to down the road, but not today. So what defines a Mavoi? The Alter Rebbe says defines a Mavoi. This is the definition of a Mavoi. It has two chatzeres. Each chatzer has to have two batim. That means from the Mavoi you have to have an entrance to two chatzeres. Each chatzer has to have at least two houses. Now, if it has less than that, if it doesn't have these conditions, then this Mavoi is no longer a Mavoi that you could use a lechi or a kaira, rather it becomes a chatzer where you need pasim. Why? Because if it's less than that, or if it doesn't have at least two chatzeres and each chatzer has two batim, then the Mavoi becomes called more of a Hamish place to do things that you would usually do in your chatzer or in your house. Now, and even if there's a lot of houses without chatzeres that are open to it, like today, that you have each house is its own property, is open directly to a Mavoi, or a bunch of chatzeres, which each chatzer has one house, these are all considered. These Mavois become considered a chatzer rather than a Mavoi, and therefore you would not be able to be machshiret with a lechi or a kaira. Rather, you need a pass, either a wide pass or two pass in mashu, one on each side of the entrance. And the Alter Rebbe says, "V'lachin," and it's a quote from the Ramah, "Kol mevoyes shelanu yesh lem din chatzer." All the mevoyes today pretty much have a din of a chatzer rather than a din of a mavoi, and therefore we are more machmer in them like a mavoi. Now, another condition is every opening, the minimum din Pesach, the din of an opening is at least 4 tfachim. That means the definition of a Pesach is between 4 tfachim and 10 amas. That is the definitions of a Pesach that you're going to see. If it's less than 4 tfachim, it's not considered a Pesach. If it's more than 10 amas, it's also not considered a Pesach. So if you have an opening from, so now when we have this Mavoi which has chatzeres, and from each chatzer has 2 houses, the openings from the Mavoi to the chatzer, each opening from the Mavoi to a chatzer, and each opening from a chatzer to the houses has to be at least 4 tfachim wide, otherwise it's not considered a Pesach. Next one is you have to eat in every house. Every house in this chatzer means 2 chatzeres, and every chatzer has 2 houses. Each one has to have that people eat there, not only sleep there. Now, but ultimately, because we're Mekel and Eirov, so if there's 2 houses in one chatzer, which is a father and a son, and the son receives food from the father and he eats by the father, it's still considered 2. Even though when it comes to Eiruve Chatzeros, we say that a father and a son is considered 1. The same logic we have there, why we say it's 1, is the logic we have here, why we say it's 2, because the whole thing is with different seifrim, and we are mekel here and we're mekel there. Over here we're mekel to consider it 2, so that way it becomes a chatzer, so that way the mavoi becomes a mavoi, and when it comes to the chatzeres, we consider them both together, that they don't have to be. They don't have to do an eruv between each other. They don't have to do eruv chatzeres. Now, when you have one mavoi which has two chatzeres, one is goyim and one is yidden. So each chatzer has two houses. So here we also go lahakol and we say that it's this such a mavoi is enough with a lechi and a kaira. Now in Sifla Medal, the Alter Rebbe goes, gives more conditions that if you have the Yashemrim, that these two chatzeres that are in this mavoi cannot have their own independent opening, rather they have to be able to use the mavoi to get from one to another. If there is an opening between these two chatzeres, then if there is an opening between these two chatzeres and they could make their own independent eruv to carry from one to another, they do not need the mavoi, and then they're considered as if they are one chatzer. If they are one chatzer, then again the mavoi loses its status as a mavoi. The same thing is if both houses are attached to each other and they don't have to go through the chatzer to go from one to another. Then this chatzer becomes, instead of it being a chatzer of two houses, it becomes a chatzer with only one house inside, and again the mavoi turns back to being a chatzer. That is the Yashemrim. The Alter Rebbe concludes, v'yesh matirim v'chein ikar, that the ikar shit is like the ones who are matir. Next conditions of a mavoi, it says Sifla Med Beis, the mavoi has to be longer than its width. You look at the mavoi, it cannot be a square, it has to be a bit longer than its width. What is considered, if it's this exactly a square, or if the width is more than the length, then it's considered a chatzer, not a mavoi. How do you decide what is the length and what is the width? You know, we're not going based on north, south, east, west, and we're not going, it's a square. How do we decide which one is the north and which one is the arkoi and which one is the rachboi? So the Alter Rebbe right away tells you in the bottom, sends you to the Rashba. The Rashba tells you that the derech knisasa is the arkoi. It means the entryway to the mavoi, whichever way you enter, that is the arkoi. So if you enter, if the opening of the mavoi is narrow and it's long, then it's a mavoi, longer. If the opening of the mavoi is wide and it's not longer than the width, then it's considered a chatzer. However, that only applies to a mavoi. When it comes to a chatzer itself, if you have a chatzer which is not open directly to Reshus Harabim, rather the chatzer is open to a mavoi. So therefore, in this chatzer, we don't care if it's even if it's longer than its width, then we say that you could use a lechi and a kaira. Yeah, even though this own chatzer by itself is not, even though this own chatzer on its own doesn't have bottom and everything else, and we say that by a regular chatzer we are machmer that you have to have a pas. Over here, if the chatzer is not open directly to Reshus Harabim and it's arka yoisa arochba, you could use a lechi or a kaira. Now,
so whenever we talk about chatzeres, that chatzeres means two passes, we're only talking about a chatzer that's open
to Reshus Harabim, yeah. One pass, wide pass, or two small passes. Now, in today's day and age, that we already determined that the vast majority of mevoyos are not really mevoyos, rather they are chatzeres because there is no openings towards them. In such a scenario, then these chatzeres themselves, which are open to a mavoi, each independent chatzer, you could use a lechi and a kaira. Now, if they're open directly to Reshus Harabim, you have a problem, and you need pasim or tzuras Pesach. It's not enough to do. We'll soon see even if pasim work, but it's not enough to do a lechi and a kaira if the chatz is open directly to Reshus Harabim. The mevoyos that we're talking about, obviously, we're talking about mevoyos that their openings as less than 10 amas, and the width of them is less is not the width of a 16 amas, which is the width of Reshus Harabim according to first opinion in the Alter Rebbe and Shimon Hay. Now, this whole idea of chatzeres and mevoyos and everything else only applies when the mavoi or the chatzer is made l'dira. It's made for the purpose of residence. That means that you walk into the mavoi for the purpose of getting into your chatzer, going home. But if the street is not for the purpose of residence, yeah, it means nobody does any tashmishim in any tashmishi like things that you would do inside your chatzer, you do inside this mavoi. Then this mavoi again goes back to being a mavoi. It doesn't become a chatzer, right? L'cha'ira, it doesn't become a chatzer. Because the only reason why it becomes a chatzer is because since it's so small, or it's not exactly, it doesn't have chatzeres, so when people want to hang out together, they all come out to the street. But if it's not so, then it's not a problem. Now if you look, it depends which neighborhoods you go to. Some neighborhoods you do see people do all their parties on the streets, and barbecues, so I'm not exactly sure how to define streets in certain towns, depending on what's considered, if it's considered a chatzer, if it's considered a mavoi. Now, in Sif Lamed Beis, the Alter Rebbe continues, Lafichach, therefore, all the mavoyos that we have all the mevoyos that we have today, which have din chatzeros, and they're open to the Reshus Harabim or to a Carmelis, and therefore we are machmir on these mevoyos like a chatzer which is open to Reshus Harabim or to a Carmelis which needs a pass, one pass or one wide pass of Daled or two passim of Kol Shehu. As long as im einam rechavim me'aser ames, obviously, as long as the opening is less than 10 ames wide, once the opening is more than 10 ames wide, then this pass is not going to help you, and you will need a tzuras haPesach. Now, the Alter Rebbe goes down to the next thing. If we have an ir mukefes chayma, the whole ir has a din of a chotzer. Why is that so? The way these ir mukefes chaymas are, usually they would build houses, then they would put a chayma around it, and therefore the chayma was made as a residential enclosure of everything, so it becomes one big chatzer with a lot of people living in it. Therefore, if it's one big chatzer with a lot of people living in it, every mavoi within this enclosed city has to have a tikkun to be able to say, if it's a mavoi, it's the streets that Yidden live in, streets that Goyim live in, you have to separate them. Now, when you have one chatzer, and you want to split one chatzer into two lachlik reshus achas abeis reshuyas, we are again machmer, and a lechi and a koira does not help you. Rather, you need mechitza gemura. That's the lashon. You need a mechitza gemura, complete mechitza, and therefore lechi and a koira are not considered the mechitza gemura. They only work as a heker for, or even a mechitza, which is not a mechitza gemura, a lechi for enclosing one reshus. But over here, when you want to split the reshuyas, a lechi and a koira doesn't help, and you need tzuras haPesach at the entrance and at the end of every mavoi or pasam. It's not enough to do lechi. Then the Alter Rebbe continues, and this is what the focus of today's shir is mainly going to be on. Alter Rebbe continues in Sif Lamed Beis. The minig hapashut in those days was, how would they be mesaken mevoyos? They would not put a koira, they would not put a lechi. There would be a house on the right, a house on the left. They would tie a string to the roof, to the house on the right, the first roof, and tie another string to the roof on the house on the left, and shine, and that's it. Now, that doesn't work. Why? Because a string can't be a koira. Koira has to be tefach. It's not tefach, it's a string. And it can't be a tzuras haPesach. Why? Because it doesn't have the sticks under it. So therefore you have to put sticks under it. However, where are you going to put the sticks? Both houses have roofs sticking into the mavoi. And if you're going to put the stick, the stick is going to be under the roof. So the way you have to do is, you have to put two konim, mechuvanim mamesh tachas hachevel, again, because tzuras haPesach, these poles have to be directly under it, and that makes it a tzuras haPesach, even though there's a lot of air between them, between the stick, which is all the way on the bottom, and the string, which is above the roof. However, Yesh Mishoimer, he brings the Taz, that it only works when you have only avir between the stick. If the stick doesn't reach all the way to the string, then you can't have anything interrupting the passageway, interrupting the stick from the string. So therefore, according to the Taz, if you have these sticks, and then you have the roof, which sticks out, you have the string is on top of the roof, tied to the roof, and then you have a stick under the roof, and you direct the stick should be directly under the string, but it's really under the roof. You have to drill holes in the overhang of the roof, so the stick should be directly under the string. And then the Alter Rebbe right away points out to you on the bottom of Tzarech Iyun, Mekipe Daf Yud Aleph. This din of the Taz Tzarech Iyun from the din of Kippur. What's the din of Kippur? We learned it in Siman Shin Samach Beis, that when you have a Tzuras HaPesach, which is square, and inside of it you have a kippah, so the kippah itself is blocking the air between the sticks and the top pole, and therefore over there we're mater. So why over here we're machmer? Alter Rebbe leaves it as a tzarech iyun. Now, just as an idea to think of, that you have to remember the difference between a tzuras HaPesach when there is a gap between the stick and the string on top of it, or a tzuras HaPesach that has a hefsek under the string. It's two separate things, and we're going to get to each one independently. But right now what we're talking about is that you have something which is blocking the invisible line from the stick all the way up. Now, the Sheiras Yehuda seems to be machmir, even in such a scenario. Sheiras Yehuda, towards the end of the tshuva, which is on page 8 by you, seems to be machmir that you still have to do the holes over there. I'm not exactly sure if he's totally machmir or not, because over here he says that this is discussing what we're going to discuss soon. We're going to get back to this tshuva later. But that he put the konim of Tzuras HaPesach under the roof, v'tzivisi l'karev v'lakaisa, and I put the konim close to the wall. Rak an yosisi nekev bagag kirtzena bal bayis. But I also made a hole in the roof, like the person wanted, the bal bayis wanted. So you could look at it both ways. Either the only reason he made the hole is because the guy wanted to follow the stricter opinion, or because the Sheiras Yehuda actually believes that we should follow the stricter opinion, even though Alter Rebbe puts it in the footnote as tzarech iyun. Tzarech iyun doesn't mean that the halacha changes. Alter Rebbe in the Pnim put it lahachmir, that you can't have a hefsek, even though in the footnote Alter Rebbe puts it as a question mark, that this doesn't make sense. Now let's.
Is the kippah under Tzuras HaPesach, or kippah itself is Tzuras HaPesach?
Keep it under Tzuras HaPesach. It's Tzuras HaPesach, which is a square, and inside of it has a arch. Yeah, so that's how you would understand it. If you read it the simple way, Shara Osi Kippah means it's just a regular arch. If it's a regular arch, you don't have that problem. You don't have that hefs.
It could be the
Thing is, but if you understand it like I just explained it to you, that's in tzarech iyun. Otherwise, what issue do you have? You don't have any hefsek between the sticks and between the bottom ones and the top ones.
Didn't hefsek apply also if there's a particular safety?
That's a discussion. Or even if it's particular, is a separate problem.
Meaning,
do you have a wall between?
You put a rope on two roofs that are sticking out over the.
That's what we're going to get to now. So now let's go into, even though Tzuras HaPesach is really discussed in Shin Samach Beis, but because this din of Tzuras HaPesach is discussed over here in this Siman, I kept most of the dinim of Tzuras HaPesach to discuss it today. The discussion of Tzuras HaPesach when you have something disturbing at Tzuras HaPesach. The classical Tzuras HaPesach is You have one stick on the right, one stick on the left, and a string pulling from one to another. Sometimes you have tzuras HaPesach when the sticks go all the way up, when the sticks have a gap. But still there's nothing, we already just went now, if you have something blocking the travel of the sticks all the way up to the string. Now what happens if the sticks and the string are in direct line? There's no problem with them. However, something is interrupting this tzuras HaPesach. Let's go through a bunch of examples and a bunch of shittas in each one. This is the tzuras HaPesach right here. From here to here, this is the tzuras HaPesach. And inside the tzuras HaPesach, you have a massive tree or a wall that's blocking access to it. So, tzuras HaPesach means an entryway. Is it considered tzuras HaPesach or not? Or is this mevatel everything? This is a Maril, not the Sheres Yehuda, but the original Maril. In his Minhagim, Likutim Ois Tesvav, he says that it's not a problem. His lashon is afsoka sa'etz nir'ed de'ein mevatel. That's not. It doesn't cancel the tzuras HaPesach. There's three versions in the Maril what he wrote. Three old kisviyad. One is nir'ed de'ein mevatel. One is lo nehira sheyeser, and one is eina oiser. There's three ways of looking at it, but all the same idea. That the Maril does not seem to think that it would be a problem. Why is that? Because he says when the Rosh and the Rashba have an argument, when you have a koira, which is a very thick koira, that part of it is above 20, part of it is under 20. And then the Rashba over there says that it doesn't work as a koira. Why? Because it ain't a koira of a mechitza. It's not a koira because it's above 20. It's not a mechitza because it's not close to 10. The Rosh disagrees and he says that it's not a problem. It's still considered a proper enclosure. And the Maril uses this as an explanation that we look, ultimately, at tzuras HaPesach. The logic of the Maril is that tzuras HaPesach is essentially supposed to close it off like a wall. So therefore, if I put a tree there, I just closed it even better. So what's the problem? So therefore, it just became a full wall. It doesn't cancel tzuras HaPesach.
It has to be the way that people make doors. It's different.
Yeah, the way you make a tzuras HaPesach is the way doors are made. But what's the din of a tzuras HaPesach? We did mechitza. That it's sasum.
Right, but the Moshe, if it's by the cat and zav, it's right at the end of the wall, even though it's sasum, to say no, it's not considered sasum.
It's not a derech to do it, right. So therefore, based on this Maril, there was a bunch of who was the Beis Shloime and Avnei Nezen, the Pischazut, the Chesed Lavron, וחצר Ashorin, and all the other ones, they all say that if it's completely blocked, even if it's completely blocked, it's not a problem. Based on this Maril. The Divrei Yoel, the Satmarov, he says that there's no way to understand the Maril that way, and to understand he disagrees with it. He says the only way this applies is, yes, it's a stimmer that it's memayit, it makes the tzuras HaPesach smaller, as long as there's still a way to get through it. So if the tree or the wall completely blocks the tzuras HaPesach, you can't put a tzuras HaPesach here and put a wall. The tzuras HaPesach should go along the wall. Now obviously if you're talking about a wall which is 10 tefachim high, you don't need a tzuras HaPesach over there. We're talking about when there's something that's blocking it, blocking the access, or a tree that's going below 10 or something like that. So the Divrei Yoel says as long as there's a way to still use the tzuras HaPesach as an entryway, tzuras HaPesach works even if it is even.
How could it not completely block? Is there a stick coming in between?
What stick? There's a stick here, there's a stick there, there's a string here.
True.
Now you have a tree or a bunch of a vine, not a tree. Use a vine. You guys saw grapevines. It's all growing. You have vines all here, this whole area. There's no way to cross it. But the vines are not 10 tefachim. If they'll be 10 tefachim, you count it as a wall. But now you have vines and you can't go through them. And they're all the way down to the bottom. It's blocking your access. So like I said, almost everybody says that it's not a problem, but so the Divrei Yoel says it still has to be some access over there. Otherwise, everybody's relying on the Maril, but the Maril is not talking about, essentially his idea is the Maril is talking about a tree, and even by a tree there's some way to get through it. We're not talking about that it was completely blocked like a wall. If it's completely blocked like a wall, it's always tzuras HaPesach. If it's completely wall which is blocking you, it's less than 10 tfachim, then the tzuras HaPesach, and you have a tzuras HaPesach that's going on the two sides because you want to close off the area, it doesn't work. Tzuras HaPesach on top, around the wall doesn't help anything. Now, there is a general discussion. In every kind of hefsek that you have, whether it's a wall, now sometimes you have a tzuras HaPesach going like this, here. You want to close off this whole box, right? So this is, you have walls and everything, and here you have a tzuras HaPesach right here. This section you have a tzuras HaPesach. And through the tzuras HaPesach you have a wall this way. Right? Or you have a house here, or you have a tree here. And it's not the problem of not being able to get through. The problem right now is that you have something which is blocking. The tzuras HaPesach starts over here, then you have a wall that's breaking it, then you have the rest is open. Does that work or not? Or if you have a house right here in the middle, and you have a tzuras HaPesach that goes on top of the house. It is very common when you use electricity wires for tzuras HaPesach that you will have tzuras HaPesachs going over houses, going over walls, going over all these kinds of things, and it's very important to understand what the issue is, what the issues are, and if you could get around it or not. Because if you hold that it's a problem, then when you have a tzuras HaPesach that starts over here, ends over here, and you use electricity wires, and the electricity wires are going over a house or going over a wall, there's walls between, there's going over a wall because it takes a turn. The wires don't always follow exactly the route of the streets. Sometimes when you want to cross from one street to another, it might cross on top of a property, electricity wires. So, is it considered a problem or not?
Why is this any different than the socket and model before?
Because over here you could get by it. So you don't have
So it's even better. That's what the real said. Like, even better then.
Yeah.
The real saying even if it's completely blocked. Then
even that, there are people that are machman. I'll tell you why. It comes to a whole different thing. This idea of a tree that we have over here, a small tree or a wall that's blocking it, I'm standing here, I see the whole tzuras HaPesach. I see the stick, I see the string. I have a tree, I see everything. Elamai, I can't go through it. If I have a wall here, and I have a tall tzuras HaPesach, and when I'm standing on this side, I see the string, I see this stick, I don't see that stick. If I'm in this house, all I can see is the string. Or if I'm standing on one side of the house, I can see the string and maybe one stick, I can't see the other stick. So there are some that hold, the Vayan Yosef, for example, the Puperov, that you have to be able to see that tzuras HaPesach also has somewhat of an element of heker to it, and you have to be able to see, the people have to be able to see where the tzuras HaPesach starts, where the tzuras HaPesach ends, and the string. Why is this important to know? If you're going to make an Eruv, and you will want to follow the Vayan Yosef, you will not be able to use very long ones that you can't see them. When you stand, at some point you have to be able to see the first pole and the last pole. Right? Now, not everybody holds like that. Stand
further back, you can always see it.
Yeah, but if standing inside the tzuras HaPesach, you should be able to see the whole thing.
Why?
Because it also has an idea of a heker. A little bit of a heker also in the tzuras HaPesach. Now, there are those who, like the Gos Chachma Shleima, the Pischizuta, the Even Yikara, they all disagree, and they say that all you have to see is just the one on top. You don't have to see the poles on the side. It's enough if you see the one on top. If you don't see anything, then it's a problem. Now, there are other opinions which also discuss this, and they say that if you have a roof, if you put a tzuras HaPesach under a roof, then you have a problem because of particular Yerid V'Seis. So it says the same thing as having a stick behind the wall. A particular Yerid V'Seis. Because right now you have particular Yerid V'Seis. So if you look at it, if the problem is because you can't see it, then you could see it. So heck, if the problem is because something is blocking it, then it doesn't help you anything. Two tzuras HaPesach that are crossing a wall and a tzuras HaPesach, then it's not a tzuras HaPesach. A tzuras HaPesach doesn't have an entry to the house, doesn't have a wall going in between it. So it's not the way the tzuras HaPesach should be done. So therefore, that would be a problem. Now, it's interesting, the Evan Yekara, he says that a lot of people, he basically says a lot of people look at this hefsek, they learn the dinim of hefsek, because the Shulchan Aruch doesn't discuss it. The only thing you have is the hefsek avir between the roof, between the roof and the stick on top, and the string, between the stick and the string. He says all these hefseks, no hefsek is a problem, unless it's between the stick and the string. Any other kind of interruption under the Tzuras HaPesach is fine. Hefsek between the karka and the Tzuras HaPesach is not a problem. Only hefsek between this Evan Yekara, Madura Gimel, Siman und Vav. Now, but all this is based on the idea, even though it's a machmer, is based on the idea that Tzuras HaPesach has a certain element of heker to it. Now, I don't know if you remember what we discussed in the previous year when we went through part of Siman Mem of the Tzemach Tzedek, where the Tzemach Tzedek clearly says regarding Tzuras HaPesach is, I'll read the Lashon, just the end of Sif Gimel quickly. He says, well, not in Gimel, Ois Hey. Also in Gimel, but mainly in the end of Ois Hey. He says, Miu b'tzuras ha'pesach l'kuli al machoshu v'keiro gamkin, oi de'en tzorich ha'keiro. Usually both. Doesn't tell you. It says there are, one of the explanations of the Tzemach Tzedek is that tzuras ha'pesach b'chlal don't have the element of heker. Now, if you want to say there's an element of heker, then you have a problem. And then you have to say that either, if you need some kind of heker, you have to be able to see the string. And when it comes to a hefsek, it all depends on how you look at it. Do you say you could follow the most lenient opinion that no hefsek makes a problem? You could follow a more stricter opinion that a hefsek does make a problem in certain scenarios, or you could say that it's only a problem if it completely blocks. And completely blocking is when it's in front of you. Now, if you put a Tzuras HaPesach right in front of a wall, you don't have a problem. The problem is when the blocking is inside the Tzuras HaPesach. So if you have a wall here, and you put a Tzuras HaPesach here, it's not a problem. Pesach in front of it. So if you have a half a wall, and in front of it you put a Tzuras HaPesach, then it's fine. Now, what happens if you have a Tzuras HaPesach which goes over an independent Rishus? Well, it's a Rishus HaYachid, like we said, or not even Rishus HaYachid. When you have a river, this is a question that also comes up a lot, crossing rivers. You have a river which is amoik, a mislaket and everything, and it's now its own rishus. Yeah? Or you have a ditch. Sometimes you have on the sides, you have ditches, which could be kiveya rishus la'atzma. In certain places where a lot of rain, they don't worry about the drainage systems in the highways. Rather, they just make, you'll see it some places, just make big ditches on the sides, and all the water runs through those ditches. And you see it, and I don't know if you ever pay attention next time you go on the highway. The highways are not straight. They're a little bit slanted to both sides. Also, all the streets are like that, but there's drainage. But in the highways, you don't have drainage systems. You have ditches on the side where all the water runs into and flows. Now, those ditches could be a Rishus HaYachid or a Carmelis or something, because they're deep and they cut and they're the own Rishus. So what happens if I have a Tzuras HaPesach which goes over that, or goes over a river, or goes over its own independent rishus? So there are some who are machmer. The Pri Megadim is machmer. It's machmer. The Chashloim is machmer. The Chasam Sofer, Sheila Meishu, the Bishloim, Avnezel, the Mordechai. They all say that it is not a problem in such a scenario, even though there's a different rishus. It's not considered blocking. Even if you want to be machmer, it's not even if you want to be machmer when you have something sticking out in the middle of a wall going up, it doesn't apply when it's crossing over just as the path is crossing over a ditch or a boir or anything of the sort, which is his own rishus. The Nesivos L'Shabbos says, which is one of the more, Nesivos L'Shabbos comes and he takes an approach. He says, yes, obviously we're go according to people that are mekel. However, this only applies if the stick is not inside the water. If the stick is inside this river, then the kulei alma, it's not going to work. So that works. You want to have a Tzuras HaPesach crossing over a river, that's fine, one on each side. But you can't have a Tzuras HaPesach You put one stick in the river and the other stick outside, that already doesn't work. Now, what happens when you have a tzuras Pesach which goes in two different reshuyos or it's not visible? Yeah. Now, let's use this two different ways of two different scenarios. One scenario is I'm doing a tzuras, I'm closing off the city for Rishus Harab. This is something which also comes up. I'm closing off the city for Rishus make an Erev over there, and I want you to make tzuras Pesachs. The electricity pole that I'm using, or the stick that I want to use, is behind the wall inside somebody's private property. So it's not outside. You don't have one here and one. You have this is the private property, this bime, and you have I'm pulling a tzuras Pesach behind me, and the first stick is inside the tzuras Pesach. I mean, the first stick of tzuras Pesach is inside the reshus. Then you have the other way. I want to close off my property. I have a big property that's open to the Rishus Harabim, and it has a gate in the back and the walls on two sides, but the front is completely open. I want to put a tzuras Pesach in the front. Now, I don't want this ugly tzuras Pesach to be inside my property and the place where I do it. So what I have a wall here, and I have a wall here, and I have bushes. And I go and I stick the stick into the bushes behind the wall. So now the tzuras Pesach starts behind the wall. Is that a problem in either of these scenarios?
You just said we're making that.
Huh?
You just said it's going over Rishus we're making.
No, but what happens if you don't? What I'm saying is right now I have a wall here, and the stick of tzuras Pesach is inside here.
Inside your Rishus?
Inside my reshus, and I'm using it for outside, or for kert. If it's outside my reshus, I want to use it for inside.
In the second case you're mentioning, where it's in his Rishus.
You don't have the problem of going through, huh?
Both kanim are inside his own Rishus?
One kana is inside my reshus, one kana is right outside the wall, outside my reshus. So I put a kana outside my gate.
In case that's possible.
Huh?
We just said before that it's
No, so we're just talking about water. If it goes into, yeah. Now, the Chavas Das in Mekor Chaim brings two reasons why it's a problem. If it's inside, if it's in the first case, when I'm building an Erev, closing off a public, a Karmelis or a Rishus Harabim, and I'm using tzuras Pesach, so when I'm closing off a Karmelis, using tzuras Pesach, in such a scenario, and then one of the sticks is inside the Rishus HaYachid, behind the wall, the Chavas Das is machmer for two reasons. Reason number one, tzuras Pesach needs a hecker. Reason number two is that since it fills up the wall that's blocking it, fills up the whole area of the tzuras Pesach. It's as if it's tzuras Pesach, the stick is completely cancelled. The stick is in here, inside, and the wall fills up the whole gap, goes all the way up, so to speak. So it blocks breaks the tzuras Pesach, and you don't have a tzuras Pesach anymore. The Marsham brings in the name of a Divrei Chaim that both reasons don't make sense in this scenario. However, you can't go against the Mekor Chaim if you should be machmer like him. So what's the solution in such a scenario? Very simple. Just put another kana outside the wall. If you have to use electricity pole inside and an electricity pole over there, you just put a kana on the outside part of the wall, mechuven under the electricity line, and you're fine. You're good to go. Because you anyways have the electricity wire running, and you have an electricity pole that's inside the person's Rishus HaYachid. So, but you can't use it because you want to be machman like the Mekor Chaim, so which is the Chavas Das. So what you do is you just put a stick you put a small stick mechuven keneged the string in the Karmelis. So you basically close off the Rishus the tzuras Pesach. Instead of it starting inside, this is the wall. Instead of starting here and ending here, you put another stick right here, and then it starts here and ends here.
You're cutting it off and going back there, like the opposite.
Yeah, then you have to start it again on the other side of the property. Yeah, I did Eiroven like that, where I have to put strips the whole way. Now, if there is the Yeshus Yaakov, the Buchar Shadav, the Nezer, the Iver Mesharim, Kinyan Torah, they all go and they say this all applies when you don't see the stick of the wall on either scenario. However, if the stick sticks out above the wall and it's visible, you solve the problem, at least one of the problems, therefore it's mutter. And some of them say that you should stick a 10 tefachim above the height of the wall.
But I don't know, it's still in his property.
Beyond some, but then at least you see it. You solve the problem that it has a hecker. You don't have the problem. And since it's above, so it starts further up, so you could always say that since it has its own 10 tefachim, so even if we cut it from there and we start at 10 tefachim from above, you have 10 tefachim of cleared area. So to speak, you have a wall and you have 10 tefachim above it of Tzuras HaPesach. It's better too. Usually electricity poles, you don't have to worry about it. They're much more than 10 tefachim above the wall. Now, Sif Lamed Gimel Alter Rebbe continues and he says if you don't have konim under the... Now, what happened? We go back to what we said before, that you have a string from roof to roof, you have to put the 2 sticks. If you don't put the 2 sticks under it, the walls themselves are not considered Tzuras HaPesach. That means, you would think that since I'm putting it from one house on the right to one house on the left, the walls of the house should be considered Tzuras HaPesach. No, the walls of the house do not count as a kone of a Tzuras HaPesach. What's the reason? Common sense. The Chachamim required you put a kaida over there and not a string. If the Chachamim required a kaida, means that they didn't rely on the 2 walls of the houses to be considered konim of Tzuras HaPesach. If it would be konim of Tzuras HaPesach, you'd just be able to pull a string. You don't need to put a kaida. So obviously, it is that it does not count it. However, if you have something sticking out of the wall, you have a stick sticking out of the wall, you have the gifufim, which is what we said, the little bricks that are sticking out that are less than 3 tefachim from the floor up, then you could count that as the konim of Tzuras HaPesach, as long as you had that in mind before Shabbos. And Alter Rebbe concludes, as long as they are visible under the string to those who require it. Those who require it is the taz that we mentioned in the previous if. Now let's move on to the next topic, which is not written in Shulchan Aruch. It's mainly in the Tshuvas. And that is, you make it Tzuras HaPesach and outside, and you want to make it Tzuras HaPesach to close off an area. You have a house, whether it's on a private property, you have a house, and you want to make it Tzuras HaPesach to close off a street. Yeah? Does the Tzuras HaPesach have to be within 3 tefachim or not? Last year we discussed all these tshuvas just in relevance to understanding the din of a lechi, but that is more, all these tshuvas are discussing a scenario when there was a house. In front of the house there was like a sidewalk, there was some bumps, there was things sticking out of the foundation, so it wasn't easy to walk over there. At the same time you also had the roof overhang, and you couldn't put the Tzuras HaPesach stick within 3 tefachim of the house. However, these disturbances on the ground were not enough to prevent people from walking over it. It just made it harder. So you had more than 3 tefachim. You couldn't start the Tzuras HaPesach until more than 3 tefachim away from the house. And the question was whether it's allowed to or not. So we did bring the וחצר, we mentioned him last time. The וחצר holds that it's a problem. Why? Because of Gdari. And you have the Alter Rebbe, which he says the וחצר got it all wrong. It has nothing to do with Gdari. The whole reason, because he brings it from a lechi. That by a lechi you need lavud. He says by a lechi has nothing to do with Gdari. By a lechi it's midin mechitza. So Machzedek expounds and makes it even longer, the explanation. That by a lechi, it's not really a mechitza. The Chachamim converted it into a mechitza when it's connected to another mechitza. A lechi, it's a big chiddush. To make a lechi into a mechitza, it has to be close to another mechitza, to the other 2 mechitzas. But if it's not close to the other 2 mechitzas, then the lechi is not its own mechitza. However, Tzuras HaPesach is independently a mechitza. If Tzuras HaPesach is independently a mechitza, it doesn't have to be lavud. The whole reason, so that's what the Alter Rebbe says, Leisman Dechash, you don't have to worry about it. The Sheris Yehuda, which is right after in your book, starts on page 5, ends on page 8. He on page 7, when he goes to the Maskana, he explains it. He says that if it's more than 4 tfachim, you have to be machmer for a different reason. More than 4 tfachim is already a Pesach. The minimum size of opening is 4 tfachim. So now, being that when the street, it rains in the street, so the streets then were not paved, they were all mud. So where would people walk? They'd walk on the sides, because you have the pieces of the foundation and you have these things sticking out, so it's higher up than the mud. You have on what to walk on, so it's not comfortable. But when it's rainy and muddy, it's definitely better than walking over there. So being that it's like that, and it's being used, and it's more than 4 tfachim, so you have to make, he said to make a small tzuras HaPesach in the gap between the house and the big tzuras HaPesach. That's what the Sheiras Yehuda Paskin. Alter Rebbe didn't say that you have to do that at all. The Tzemach Tzedek has 2 tshuvas on the matter. Mem and Mem Aleph. In Mem, after we already discussed the whole din of Lechi, in Mem, then starts in Ois Zayin and on, in Siman Mem, he explains, after he explains what the shit of Taisvus was, which we already went through, that the shit of Taisvus is that by a lechi, it's only a mechitza because of a chiddush in it. But by tzuras HaPesach, you don't need to have within 3 tfachim because it's a mechitza by himself. Yeah, so he says, first he points out that the Alter Rebbe, the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe, when it comes to tzuras HaPesach, is she'ein kan parutz klal, which means it's completely a mechitza. So therefore, it's pretty clear that if you make it further than 3 tfachim away from the wall, it works. More so, being that the tzuras HaPesach is considered oimed gomur. So now, when you have a tzuras HaPesach that's wide, and then you have a gap between tzuras HaPesach and the wall, which is less than 10 amas, more than 3 tfachim, less than 10 amas, then when you count the tzuras HaPesach is considered sasum, it becomes meruba oimed al parutz. And then the gap in between is not a problem. And he continues, he says, there are some opinions which will say that it's not, that tzuras HaPesach is considered a mechitza, but it's not considered sasum gomur, a complete stime, for the purpose of meruba oimed al parutz. You can't count it from meruba oimed al parutz. But even according to them, even if you don't count it as sasum for the purpose of meruba oimed al parutz, it's still not open. Vaday, the Lashon of Tzemach Tzedek is Vaday mafkia smokim atzmim b'din parutz l'gamri. It's definitely not parutz. So therefore, and the tzuras HaPesach we know is considered a mechitza gmura on the third, if it's on the 3rd wall, and achas kama v'kama on the 4th wall, especially since even according to the people which are machmer by tzuras HaPesach, that's not considered completely sasum, they will be mekel if you have a ruach shlishis and revis of a mava, you have 2 full walls and you put a 3rd one, you put a tzuras HaPesach, even if it's more than 10 amas, they would still do it. So for sure, if it's in such a scenario when you have a tzuras HaPesach and the gap between it is less, that tzuras HaPesach is considered a mechitza, even if the gap between the tzuras HaPesach and the house is more than 4 tfachim. However, this whole tshuva Siman Mem does not discuss a very crucial question. What is the din of this empty space? All we explained in Siman Mem was that a lechi is medin mechitza mitzat chiddush only when it's closed. That's why it's loved. Tzuras HaPesach is medin mechitza independently. It's considered sasum. Might even be considered for meruba oimed, and therefore it does not need to be loved. But what's the din of the air between them? The empty space between them. What is that? Is that a pirtzah? Is that a Pesach? What is it? That goes, the whole next Shuvah Siman Mem Aleph goes into discussing that question. What is the din, or the way that Tzemach Tzedek starts it? Aton ne'ayin b'shiur ha'avir shebein atzuras HaPesach l'koisli ha'mavoi bekamo einoi poisel mishum din mavoi shenifratz. How much can it be open? Because we didn't yet say tanamas. But how much could it be open that it should not be considered parutz? He goes through all the Shittas HaRishonim. When you have a pirza, so we know that the Mavoi, which is closed from three sides, and it's open in the front, yeah? If it's completely open, you need a lechi or whatever it is, right? What happens if you have a pirza in the front? It's not completely open, but you have a pirza beroisha shel Mavoi. That means the Mavoi, like we said, is closed on three sides, and you have a pirza in the entrance, and the pirza is 10 amas or more. It needs a tzurus Pesach.
By Mavoi, you have a
Not mefulish. Regular Mavoi. We'll get to mefulish soon. Regular Mavoi needs a pirza. It needs 10 tvachim, 10 amas. It needs a tzurus Pesach. If it's less than that, this pirza is not poiselet completely. However, this However, that only applies when it's not in the corner, because when it comes to a corner, it's a whole different din. Could you make it tzurus Pesach in the corner, which is a whole different scenario. Now he says even the ritva that seems to be machmir, the Machzedek says, at least in the beginning of the tshuva, he l'cha'ira would be maskim that even if it's more than 4 tfachim but less than 10 amas, such a pirza is not paisel. Now, comes to Ois Gimel, and the Tzemach Tzedek tells you, well, hey, we have a big problem. There's a whole discussion whether there's Osi Rabim Mevatli Mechitza or not. If you have a Mechitza, and a lot of people go through it, does the Mechitza get cancelled or not? So he says that the Tzemach Tzedek goes through it and says, is there this opening in the beginning of the Mavoi? Do we say Osi Rabim? This opening between the Mavoi and the Tzuras HaPesach that we're discussing in the Tshuva, is that Osi Rabim Vatla Mechitza? And what happens if the opening is on a different side of the Mavoi, not in the entrance? So first he proves, he says, Sai the Bach and Sai the Taz, they both are of the opinion that even when you have Baki B'y Rabim, the pirza does not become batal. However, the Chemed Moshe is machmir. The Tzemach Tzedek gives a couple questions in his logic. The Ritva also seems to be machmir. And so much so that it seems like the Ritva would be completely machmir, and this is already it's towards the end of Ois Gimel, and it doesn't make, and the Ritva is very clear that he will not be meiko in a pirza more than 4 tfachim up to 10 amas, if our Tanam is definitely at Tzurus Pesach, if Osur Rabim, if Baki B'y Rabim. Then comes the Tzemach continues in the next in Ois Daled, continues with this discussion, and he says, you know what? Even according to the Ritva, we could still solve the problem. Why is that? He says because he says he proves that B'kiyas Rabim are not paisel. There's certain scenarios where the Ritva is machmer, but not mitzad the idea of B'kiyas Rabim, that B'kiyas Rabim is what causes the psul in it, but for other reasons. And even in Rashi himself is also mekel in such a scenario. Then he goes weiter. Says, okay, so far we have, maybe there is B'kiyas Rabim is paisel, maybe not. It seems like most people hold it. It's not paisel, so the chayda were clear. However, he says maybe this only applies, and I say that Tzemach Tzedek goes into it, says maybe this only applies when the Rabbim have another access way. So you have a big opening with a Tzuras Pesach, or without, and next to it you have this pirza which is between 4 and 10. So we'll say the Rabbim are going to go to the big one. They're not going to go, maybe they're going to go to the small one also, but the small pirza, which is less than 10, even though people might go through it, it's not considered Baki B'y Rabim, even though there's Rabim going through, because the main entrance is the main opening that they're walking through is the bigger one, the Pischa Rabba, not the Pischa Zuta. So therefore in such a scenario, we would say maybe the Osi Rabim or Mevatli Mechitze will only apply when you have only one entrance. But if you have, and then if it's more than 4, less than 10, even if it's less than 10, we'll still say that Osi Rabim Mevatli Mechitze, unless you have a second one, a bigger one, a different one, a main one, and then the smaller one doesn't become Asir Rabim Mevatel Mechitza. And the Tzemach Tzedek says, yeah, it's a nice sweater, but it doesn't work. Why? For a simple reason. What are we discussing? We're here opening for a Mavai. He says, first of all, if you have just one opening to a Mavai, it never has essentially Baki by Rabim. The most you have is Rabim pushing into it, but you don't have Rabim going through it. Why? Because a Mavai is only used for the people that live in there. And it's closed. So you go through it, there's nowhere to go into. You just go, and you have to come back out. So no Rabim are going to go in there. It's not going to serve them for any purpose. So the Pischa Rabba, Pischa Zuz doesn't apply in this case. Now, even if there is Baki by Rabim, maybe we could still say, even if there is Baki by Rabim, as long as you don't leave the second, as long as the second opening is not there, it shouldn't be a problem at all. So he says this logic of connecting the two together, that the only time it applies is when there's another opening, also doesn't make sense. And he continues, says, according to the Yerushalmi, it's B'chalnat Paisel. According to the Bavli, even if you have an opening up to 10 ames, and even if Rabim Boikim Boy, according to the Bavli, it's for sure not Paisel. And if you have it Suras HaPesach, for sure it's not a problem, because Suras HaPesach over here in this tshuva, the Tzemach Tzedek says Suras HaPesach is considered Oimed, Sasum, and makes it Oimed Merubeh, and therefore, even if they go through it, the Suras HaPesach is not considered, there's no issue of Asir Rabim. So therefore, if you have a Suras HaPesach in the big one, the big opening of Suras HaPesach, and next to it you have a small opening which does not have a Suras HaPesach, even if Rabim Boikim Boy, that does not become possible. However, now we come with the next problem. By a Mavoi, we say that if a Mavoi is nifratz on the side, we'll learn it, if a Mavoi is nifratz on the side, more than 4 tfachim, it does become possible of Boiki by Rabim. Why is that? Every Mavoi usually is Meruba Imed al Parot. So why is it that if you have a pirtze on the right side of 4 tfachim, it makes the whole thing, you have to be masak in that pirtze, it's less than 10 amas. If it's Baki by Rabim, you have to be masakin at l'chayra. Why? What should the problem be? We just said that by a Mavoi, if it's less than 10 ames, we don't say Baki, we don't say that Asir Rabim Mevatel Mechitza. So why is that? So he says, first of all, he says, Taka the Panim Meiris, when he discusses it, brings it from the Rambam, proves from the Rambam and others that Bechlal did not mention this idea of the pirza on the side. He says, Taka, they don't hold it as a problem. But from the Gemara, it's mashma that it is a problem. When it's a Mavoi Akum, not by a regular Mavoi. It's a Mavoi Akum, which is like a L, then it's a problem. So Tzemach Tzedek says, okay, you want to bring a proof from Mavoi Akum, and a Pirtzas Mavoi is not the same thing. You want to say Asir Rabim Mevatel Mechitza because by a Mavoi Akum, Asir Rabim Mevatel Mechitza, it's not the same as a Pirtza. It's not the same as a Pirtza on the side. Why? 3 reasons, 3 differences between a Pirtza B'tzad Mavoi, where you would not say Asir Rabim Mevatel Mechitza, and a Pirtza and a Mavoi, which is Akum, where you would be able to say it. First reason is, Mavoi Akum, Mavoi Akum means an L. If I'm standing not at the L point where it crosses, if I'm standing at one end of it, I don't see the other end of the Mavoi because it takes a turn. I don't see a tikkun over there. I only see a tikkun on one side. That's why you have to put a tikkun by the L area. Where it turns, by the corner, you have to put a tikkun. In every corner, you have to put a tikkun. Because otherwise, you can't see the Suras HaPesach when you take a turn. So he says, over there, in that scenario, the pirtza, when someone's standing by the Rosh of the Mavoi, he sees a completely open pirtza. Paruz v'milui. He doesn't know what's on the other side of it. He says, Paruz v'milui. If it's Paruz v'milui, there's no tikkun whatsoever. By a pirtza b'tzad Mavoi, you don't have Paruz v'milui. Even a person standing, he sees that it's not Paruz v'milui to anything. It's only 4 tfachim or 10 tfachim or 6 tfachim wide. First difference. Second one, by if it's a Mavoi Akum, which has a L, it looks like it's mefulish. Mavoi mefulish is open from both ends. The halacha is that you have to put Itzuras HaPesach on each end. It's not enough to put only on one end. You have to put on each end. So over here, when you have it takes a turn, also the corner, you would think that it's a problem. Or you could compare it. He says when it's a Mavoi Akum, you could also say that it's a Mavoi where the Nifratz Beroishoi and Loi Nishar, and there's nothing left on the sides. Not enough left on the side to mark off the borders. So when you have either all three of these, there's three reasons why it's not similar to why a Mavoi Akum, even though the Gemara in the Mavoi Akum says Asur Rabim, it's mashma Asur Rabim. In the case of Mavoi Shenifratz, they would not hold it Asur Rabim. Ki Asur Rabim. So therefore, he says he can't bring a proof. So now the Tzemach Tzedek says as follows. Now, according to the Pani Meiris, he brings a svara that we say Asur Rabim o mevatle mechitza, even by a chatzer. That means if you have a pirza and a chatzer and people go through it, we say Asur Rabim o mevatle mechitza. But the Tzemach Tzedek says it doesn't make sense, because say according to the Rambam, say according to the Ritva, it doesn't work. It's not a problem. By a chatzer, even if you have a pirza, even if Asur Rabim, it's not mevatle mechitza. According to the Ritva's logic is Reshus HaYachid remains a Reshus HaYachid. You're not closing off a carmel, it's not converting something, it's a Reshus HaYachid. So the fact that people march through Reshus HaYachid does not make it Ois Reshus HaYachid. But Tosfos also agrees that by a Chatzer you don't have Asur Rabim Mevatel Mechitza. But for a different logic. It has nothing to do with Reshus HaYachid always remaining Reshus HaYachid. The logic of Tosfos is that by a Chatzer, even if you have people going through it, if you have Asur Rabim, it's not a constant, there's no Asur Rabim Ubaki Mechitza, there's no constant flow of people going through a Chatzer. So therefore, even if there is scenarios when people will go through it, Reshus HaYachid, it still does not count as Asur Rabim Mevatel Mechitza. So from a Chatzer, we can't prove whether Asur Rabim Mevatel Mechitza. Why? Because according to Tosfos, it's just a matter of reality. According to the other opinions, Reshus HaYachid says Reshus HaYachid. According to Tosfos, it's just a matter of reality. Is there people usually don't go through it. From a Mavoi Akum, we can't prove Mavoi Shenifratz, Mavoi Akum, because Mavoi Akum has its own dinim, because it looks like it's part of the Miloi. Mavoi Shenifratz, Betzidoi, we don't yet know what the din is over there, if Asur Rabim Mevatel Mechitza or not. So we're still in the question, why by a Mavoi Shenifratz Betzidoi Dalet Tfachim we do say that you have to fix it. Why do we say you have to fix it? Why is it paisel? If we say, because until we understand why a Pirtzas Dalet Betzad Mavoi Dalet Tfachim makes it paisel, we cannot determine what the din of the Avir in our scenario is. The din of the Avir in our scenario depends on how you define an empty space within an enclosure. So we know that the Pirza Beroish Mavoi up to 10 is fine. But a Pirza Betzad Mavoi 4 Tfachim is already a problem. So now when we're putting a Tzuras HaPesach that's starting less than 10 amas away from a house, but more than 4 Tfachim away from the house, from the wall, then what is the din of this air? Is there a problem of Asur Rabim or not? If there is a problem, how do we deal with it? If there is no problem, why is there no problem? But to understand it, first we have to see what the other places were Asur Rabim and determine whether it applies to here or it doesn't apply to it. So Tzemach Tzedek goes now, Zion, and he says, a new thing, by a Mavoi, we're Machmir. Why are we Mavoi by a Machmir? Why are we Machmir by a Pirza by a Mavoi? For a simple reason. We were so mekel that it's enough to do a Lechi and a Kaira, the Chachamim also said, we're making it easier for you by a Mavoi to do a Lechi and a Kaira. At the same time, we're being Machmir that by a Pirza it should be a problem. However, Tzemach Tzedek says, even if so, very important, crucial point, the Pirza only, this Pirza which is paisel that we're discussing this whole time, Pirza which is paisel in the Mavoi, is only in the 2 walls, not the 3rd and 4th wall. 3rd and 4th wall, yeah, because with the rice you have 2 and a bit, is already Reshus HaYachid, yeah? You don't have to have full. So 3rd and 4th wall are only Mesakin Midrabanan. So the Pirzas Mavoi, which is paisel, l'cha'ira only applies in the first in the first and second wall. But in the third and fourth walls, since you could anyways do it with a lechi, and definitely in the pirza beroish mavoi, if it's a beginning at the front of the mavoi, you can also do it with a lechi. We're mekel up until 10. Now, why is it that by a pirza on the side we are more machmer to dalet fachim, and in the front we say up to 10 amas? Simple logical reason. Like we said before, if it's only open from one side, 10 amas, up to 10 amas is a Pesach. More than that, it's a different din, just it's a Pesach. But up to 10 amas is a Pesach. People are not going to go through it. When you have a pirza on the side of the mavoi, 4 tfachim or wider, what's going to happen? Anybody who wants a shortcut is going to go into the mavoi, go out the other side and cut. If there's traffic, it's just going to go through the mavoi, cut through the opening, the broken area in the wall, and come out by the other street on the other side. So it could be, the pirza 4 tfachim on the side makes the mavoi into a baki by rabbim, because rabbim now are going to come and going to be completely mevatel mechitzas. They'll use it as a shortcut. Then the Tzedek says, okay, but still, so therefore, there's the issue of osir rabbim mevatel mechitza has nothing to do with the issue of pirza b'tzad mavoi. Pirza b'tzad mavoi is pashut because the reason why osir rabbim mevatel mechitza is just a practical thing. People right now go through it, and they're mevatel mechitza, and therefore, since practically it's mevatel mechitza, so even if it's smaller than 10, you have a problem. But you have to look at it from a practical view. And Tzedek continues in Ois Ches, he says, the whole kul of Tzuras HaPesach, just because we're discussing now, this whole thing is discussing, you have a Tzuras HaPesach that's far away from the wall. He says this only applies in the fourth wall. You can't have 2 walls that Tzuras HaPesach is complete. You can't have that you have a mavoi which has 1 wall, only 2 walls, and then you're going to take a Tzuras HaPesach and just place it in the middle of the 3rd wall, and another Tzuras HaPesach in the middle of the 4th wall, and say each one is less than 10 amas away from the edge. That only works on 1 wall. You can't use this distance of 10 amas, less than 10 amas of empty space to connect the Tzuras HaPesach, unless it's only Ruach Revis. But a Ruach Shlishis, if you put a Tzuras HaPesach, it has to be within 3 tfachim of within 4 tfachim, sorry. It has to be 3 tfachim. If it's more than 4 tfachim, you have to be machmir only if baki by rabbim. Why? For the same logic as before. When you have 2 openings to a mavoi, so even though a pirza usually would not be a problem, but when you have 1 pirza going in from one side, another pirza going out from the other side, and the other pirza, and there is baki by rabbim, there is a flow of traffic, then you have to be machmir. In such a scenario, the baki by rabbim, the asi rabbim, and will be mevatel and mechitza. So if you have a pirza of 4 tfachim and baki by rabbim, you need a tzuras HaPesach, and a lechi is not going to help. But one is that, obviously, if you have it in a mavoi, which does not have a tzuras HaPesach anyways. If you have a mavoi which is closed off with proper tzuras HaPesachs on all the sides, and then you have a new pirza, you don't have to worry about tzuras HaPesach over there. Why? Because it's completely closed from 4 sides with the tzuras HaPesach. So what happens if you have a mavoi where you already used the kula of using a lechi for the entrance, and now you have a pirza on the side, and now it became asi rabbim, then you have to properly masaken to the tzuras HaPesach, and you can't rely and you can't do 2 times. You can't say, oh, the pirza is fine, and I also use the front as with a lechi. But as long as if in the front you didn't use a lechi, you actually put a proper tzuras HaPesach, and from both ends of the mavoi mefulish you put a proper tzuras HaPesach, and then you have a pirza. By a pirza, a lechi is enough. Lechi is enough, and you don't have to. So over here he says, because being that the pirza is not easy to walk by, because you have the bumps and you have everything on the sides. So therefore, if you want to walk over it, you don't have you have an issue. In these places, it's not a it's not a regular hiluch, and therefore it's not considered baki b'irabim. As opposed to the Sheres Yehuda does say that it's baki b'irabim. So Tzemach Tzedek points out, hiluch al-yedei shasat chak is considered hiluch. So Tzemach Tzedek says, no, we're not going to add too many chumras. Because midina, we don't say asur rabim mevatle mechitza in this scenario. All this is a chumra. So therefore, we're not going to also add that hiluch al-yedei chak shmei hiluch. That Sheres Yehuda was machmer up to 4 tvachim if it's hiluch rabim. So Tzedek says, no, we're not going to go that far. In this scenario, when it's not comfortable to walk on that side, when it's going through, it's not a comfortable path for people to walk by, then it's not a problem. So it comes out that Tzemach Tzedek is essentially, the Alter Rebbe doesn't make a difference. You put 3 tvachim, up to 10 amas is not a problem. According to the Sheres Yehuda, even if it's uncomfortable, over 4 tvachim, you have to put your own tzuras HaPesach because people are going to use it. If asur rabim, even in the time al-yedei atchak, is already considered a problem. According to Tzemach Tzedek, al-yedei atchak is not enough, is not a problem. However, if commonly there's asur rabim, then you do have a problem. If commonly there's no asur rabim, then you don't have a problem, and it's only a chumra that Tzemach Tzedek says, essentially, because asur rabim doesn't really apply medina. That is how the Tzemach Tzedek concludes this tshuva in Siman Mem Aleph. In Chidushim, Tzemach Tzedek turns the whole thing upside down. Because in Chidushim, I'm not going to go into it, I don't have enough time, but in Chidushim, in 2 places. In page 86 in your book, which is the beginning of Eiruv Perek Beis, I'm going to go through it quickly, and we'll start with that one, and in Perek Beis, it's going to go through in page, not 86, page 87, 86, 87, the Tzemach Tzedek goes through a whole discussion about Reshus Harabim. He explains over there that when it comes to Reshus Harabim, Tzuras HaPesach does not count as a mechitza. And the din that we said that asur rabim are not mevatel, that rabim are not mevatel mechitza, only applies to mechitza gemura. That when you have an actual proper mechitza, then we say that rabbim are not mevatel it. But Tzuras HaPesach, he says, is not a mechitza gemura. And therefore, rabbim are mevatel at Tzuras HaPesach. And it's regarding Tzuras HaPesach, and therefore, by Reshus Harabim, we need losses. And it means in a scenario when you have a shaila of Reshus Harabim, and then later, a few pages later, actually 2 pages later, in page 89, it says regarding Reshus Harabim, every Reshamayim should be machmer la'atzmoi, because the asur rabim mevatel mechitzas only applies when there's losses, not when there's Tzuras HaPesach, and therefore in a street which is wider than 16 amos, you should be machmer Reshamayim. But the idea over here is as follows, that although in the Tshuvas of Tzemach Tzedek was very clear that asur rabim mevatel mechitzah is only in certain scenarios, and the halacha it's not so. Only we're machmer in certain scenarios, and that's why by opening on the side, the only reason why a pirza is paisel is only when it's in one of the 2 walls that have to be full, and only when the opening was only mitaken with a lechi, not with Tzuras HaPesach. And then we say asur rabim mevatel mechitza. Over here, it seems like Tzemach Tzedek takes it as a clear decision that asur rabim mevatel mechitza is a problem, is a concern. But again, you can always differentiate it, and Chidushim is talking about Reshus Harabim over there, we're more machmer. In the tshuva that we're discussing, we're not discussing a direct Reshus Harabim. We might have been discussing a situation where it's close to a Carmelis or a Mavoi, where that's why Tzuras HaPesach would be considered a mechitza, and we would not say asur rabim mevatel mechitza. But according to Tzemach Tzedek, it seems pretty clear that as long as you don't have the problem of asur rabim, then it's up to 10 amos, you could do it. And according to Sheres Yehuda, it's not. According to Alter Rebbe, it's pretty clear that it's not a problem. Also, only Sheres Yehuda is machmer. And therefore, there are certain places where people will make Tzuras HaPesachs, and they will just measure 10 amos to the closest house, and they'll say, well, the Alter Rebbe said that it's not a problem. And therefore, we don't even have to worry about, so if you have an electricity poles that are starting on the edge of the street, and it's less than 10 amos from the electricity pole to the house, they'll say, well, we don't even have to make any tikkun over there, because you don't have a problem according to the Alter Rebbe. But if you're going to go through the Tzemach Tzedek, it's not so clear and it's more nuanced that you have to have it. If it's a Mavoi which is open on both sides, you have to have tikkun to the Mavoi. You can't so easily just go and brush off and say it up to 10 Tvachim is an open heter for every scenario. You can start at Tzuras HaPesach always, obviously when you have Oimed Merubah Laparutz, and start at Tzuras HaPesach less than 10 amas from the house.